My name is Elaine Whittaker. After 15 years leading care at Sunwell Haven, they erased me quietly, without warning. I found out through a leaked memo. I was too expensive to keep. I felt gutted, humiliated, discarded. But I didn't beg. I walked away, head high, and left behind the silence they thought would break me. Please listen to the whole story, then tell me, did I do the right thing? Would you have stayed, or walked like I did? I need to know. That Monday morning began like every other one had for the last 15 years. The scent of hospital-grade coffee wafted from the break room, sharp and burnt around the edges. Someone was wheeling a patient down the hallway, soft rubber wheels humming against the linoleum. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender lotion, the kind Mrs. Calloway always insisted on for her hands. I remember standing just outside the West Wing, watching the sunlight hit the far window where the bird feeders hung. The light danced in little golden squares across the floor tiles. I don't know why I paused that day. Maybe it was the silence, or the way the wind had picked up suddenly and stirred the trees outside. Something felt off. Not loud, just slightly tilted, like a frame hanging just a little crooked, and no one had noticed yet. Sunwell Haven used to be a place where you could feel the good intentions. There was a time, years ago, when we didn't count minutes per patient or compare bath times on spreadsheets. Back then, I knew every family member by name, and if someone's son called crying from out of state, I'd sit on the phone with him until he could breathe again. Now we had laminated charts pinned in the staff lounge, with words like efficiency metrics and time to turn. Each hallway had a posted number of residents, number of certified aides per shift, projected number of minutes per visit. The care was still there, sort of, but it had been carved up and put into rows, stacked and color-coded like files in a drawer. The younger nurses were fast, no question about it. They knew how to document with one hand and check vitals with the other. But you could see it in their shoulders, tight, high, waiting to be reprimanded. Their breaks were getting shorter. They weren't looking at the patients much anymore, just their charts. I had just stepped out of Mrs. Gray's room when I saw Renata Greaves again. She came around the corner with her usual sharp-heeled steps and that ever-present tablet cradled in her arm like a newborn. Her eyes never lifted from the screen as she passed two residents in wheelchairs. "Morning," I said, nodding. She blinked once, like I'd interrupted a stream of data. "Morning," she answered, glancing down the hallway again. I watched her disappear toward the admin wing. I remember thinking she had the posture of someone trying to walk faster than her conscience. The week before, we'd been in a leadership meeting when I brought up a missed blood pressure check that nearly resulted in a fall. I hadn't even finished my sentence when Renata cut in. "I appreciate your concern," she'd said, "but we're focusing on forward-looking solutions today, not backward error analysis." It wasn't cruel. It wasn't loud. It was worse, it was dismissive. Later that morning, we were called into a short meeting in the administrative conference room. Just the nurse leads and department heads. Renata stood at the front beside a printed slide titled, "Care Optimization Strategy, Q2 Preview." "As you all know," she began, "our care model is evolving. We're identifying overlap in supervisory roles. Some department heads may find their positions consolidated for maximum flow. After all, we don't need every engine pulling the train if we're going downhill." A few people chuckled politely. I didn't. My hands were still on my lap, but something inside me shifted. I'd heard metaphors like that before, phrases that dressed up subtraction as strategy. Renata kept speaking, but I couldn't focus on the words. I just kept hearing that sentence. We don't need every engine pulling the train. It stayed with me long after the meeting broke. As we filed out, one of the newer aides, Mira, brushed past me. Just a glance. Her eyes flicked up, held mine for half a second, and then looked away. I didn't know what she was trying to say, but something in her face settled deep into my stomach. Looking back, I think that was the first goodbye. She just didn't know how to say it. And I didn't know I needed to hear it. Not yet. The next morning, the nurses' station felt colder. Not in temperature, just tone. People still moved, answered call lights, updated charts, but the quiet had changed shape. It was no longer just tired quiet, it was tight, aware, avoidant. Like everyone knew something I didn't. No one mentioned the meeting. Not directly. But the way heads turned and quickly turned back when I walked into the break room told me enough. My name was on someone's lips before I opened the door. I kept my face neutral, refilled the coffee pot that had been left half empty, and went back to my rounds. That was always the safest move. Focus on the residents. They still needed help dressing, still needed someone to listen while they talked about dreams that didn't make sense anymore. That didn't change, even if the air around the staff felt different. Back in the hallway, I was checking Mr. Hughes' oxygen levels when I heard Mira behind me. "Elaine," she said quietly, like she wasn't sure she should speak. I looked up. She shifted her weight, then asked, "Did you hear they're changing the overnight staffing again? I heard there might only be one RN on each wing starting next month." "That can't be right," I said. I tried to keep my tone steady, but even to my own ears, it sounded flat. They'd never run night shift that thin. That's not safe. She gave me a half shrug. "That's what Jody said. She said it came down from upstairs." Upstairs.
I didn't ask who that meant.
I already knew. An hour later, Mrs. Vaughn's blood pressure dropped during her morning check-in. She was pale, slightly confused, slumping just enough in her chair that I knew it wasn't just fatigue. I responded quickly, upped her fluids, reclined her, checked her meds. She stabilized, but when I turned around to ask who else had eyes on her that morning, no one was there. I logged it in the system, noting that her room had been marked for rotational check every 45 minutes. But from what I could tell, no one had seen her since 7:30. It was nearly 10. By lunchtime, I needed a moment to breathe. I headed to Linden Roast, my usual escape. It wasn't far, just a 5-minute walk from Sunwell, but it always felt like a world apart. Wooden tables, real mugs instead of foam cups, and that lingering smell of cinnamon scones made it feel kinder. That's where I saw Lyle Murren again, sitting in the back corner with his worn leather briefcase and his crooked smile. "Didn't expect to see you out before 3, he said as I sat down. "I needed air," I replied. "And coffee that doesn't taste like regret." He chuckled. "Rough morning." "Just a strange one," I said. "Feels like everyone knows something I don't." He nodded slowly, taking a sip from his mug. "They probably do. Or at least think they do." I watched the steam rise from my cup. You ever get that feeling? Like the walls are shifting before you can find the door? Lal didn't answer right away. He looked out the window, then said, "I sat where you're sitting once. A little over 5 years ago. Only the job title was different. But the signs were the same." "What happened?" He leaned back in his chair. "There was a time when I believed good work could outrun bad leadership. That if I stayed long enough, proved myself enough, they'd come around." I stared down at the coffee in my hands. "And did they?" I asked. He shook his head.
"No.
They didn't. They needed numbers. I gave them names. It wasn't a match." I let that sit for a minute before asking, "When did you know it was time to walk away?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "When I realized I couldn't pray honestly for the place anymore. I'd bow my head before shift, and instead of strength, I'd ask for numbness." I blinked. I hadn't expected that answer, but something about it made my throat tighten. I took a breath and asked, "You still follow what's going on back there?" "A little," he said. "Enough to know there's new money moving in." I raised an eyebrow. "Silverstream Holdings," he said, as if the name explained everything. "Private equity firm. Bought into Sunwell last quarter. They've got a reputation." I waited. They buy in, trim out non-essential senior roles, pump up efficiency metrics, then sell off to the next buyer. Always looks clean on paper. I stared at him. "So all this, cutting heads, shortening shifts, it's part of a bigger play?" He nodded. "It's not personal, Elaine. That's the problem. You care like it's personal. They don't." I didn't say anything after that. We sat in silence for a while. The kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. Just shared. And as I walked back toward the building, toward the fluorescent lights, the spreadsheets, the smiling faces that now felt just a little too rehearsed, I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. They don't care like it's personal. But I did. And that difference, it used to make me proud. Now I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I didn't get the staff bulletin. It wasn't the first time things had slipped through the cracks. Sunwell had been juggling 3 different scheduling platforms since February, but when I checked with the other team leads, they all had the new rotation plan in hand. I was the only one left off the thread. I didn't say anything. I just made my usual rounds and waited for someone to realize the oversight and fix it. But when the reports started rolling in, they weren't coming to me. They were going directly to Jenna Wexler, our new assistant manager fresh out of grad school, who had been with us for all of 7 weeks. She wasn't rude about it. If anything, she was almost too polite. Kept saying just following the system, like it was gospel. I watched her open a spreadsheet during shift briefing and speak to the team like she'd been doing it for years. No one questioned her.
No one even looked at me.
It was like I had been pushed a few inches outside the frame, and no one had noticed the gap. Around 10:30, I was headed toward the east wing when I heard a thud. It wasn't loud, but it was the kind of sound you don't forget, like a heavy bag dropping on hardwood. My feet moved before my brain caught up. I turned the corner and found Mr. Chandler, one of our early-stage Alzheimer's patients, sprawled on the steps at the end of the hallway. His glasses were cracked. One shoe had come off. He was conscious but disoriented, blinking like he wasn't sure if what just happened was real. I dropped to my knees beside him. "It's okay, I've got you. Just stay still." I did the basics, stabilized his neck, called for a gurney, asked for ice. Only no one answered. No one had eyes on this hall. It was mid-morning. This area should have had 2 aides rotating. When Mira finally arrived, she looked panicked. I thought Jenna had someone on this side. She told me I wasn't assigned here. I asked, "Didn't you check the dashboard?" I did, but it still had me marked as off shift from last night. I didn't say anything right away. I just looked at Mr. Chandler, still trembling, still trying to form a question he couldn't quite put together. That afternoon, I sat down and wrote a memo. Not out of anger, not even to make a point, just because someone needed to. I titled it plainly, Patient Fall Incident, Review of Staffing Assignment Errors. I kept it clinical. I listed the timeline, included Myra's comments, and flagged the scheduling software as unreliable for assigning live rotations. My last line read, "Request urgent audit of staffing coverage on all wings, particularly those housing residents with memory and mobility risk." I CC'd HR, Renata, and the Clinical Oversight Committee. Then I hit send. The next morning, I was called to Renata's office without warning. No appointment. Just a knock from her admin and a simple, "She wants to see you." Renata sat at her desk, tablet in hand, fingers tapping the screen like she was scrolling through a menu, not a memo about a human being who had fallen. "I saw your email," she said, not looking up. "You sent it to 6 people." I nodded.
Yes.
I thought it warranted full visibility. She finally looked at me. Her expression was blank, but her tone had edges. That kind of language can alarm people. Phrases like urgent audit imply negligence. "I used that language because we had a preventable fall," I said. "One that happened on a shift with known scheduling errors." She leaned back, like she was preparing to make something sound reasonable. "We're in a transition phase. There will be hiccups. But what we need now is collaboration, not panic. And quite frankly, Elaine, this reads more like an indictment than a concern." I folded my hands in my lap. My concern is that someone's going to die next time. That hung in the room a few seconds longer than she liked. Renata pressed her lips together, then stood up as if to end the conversation with posture alone. "If you're not willing to support the changes this facility is making," she said, walking around the desk, "then maybe you're not aligned with our direction anymore."
She didn't yell.
She didn't have to. The threat was dressed up like a suggestion. A passive-aggressive invitation to step aside. I nodded slowly, not because I agreed, but because I suddenly understood. This wasn't a conversation. It was a performance. And I was no longer part of the cast. As I left the room, I didn't feel anger.
Not yet.
Mostly, I felt tired. 2 days after the fall, I logged into the dashboard and my name was gone. I sat there for a full minute, staring at the screen. No RN lead, Whittaker, under assignments. No role attached to my credentials. Just my name, Elaine M. Whittaker, floating alone without any designation. At first, I thought it was a system error. That had happened before. Glitches. Updates. Renata liked to roll out new tools faster than we could learn them. So I walked to the front office and asked Jenna, the assistant manager, if she'd noticed any issues with the system. She didn't look up from her desk when she said, "Oh yeah, there was some kind of update last night. IT's working on it." I waited. She didn't elaborate. No eye contact. No follow-up. Should I be listed under RN lead again once it refreshes? I asked. She hesitated. Just a beat. Not enough to catch unless you were really listening. Then, I'm not sure. Renata's been reviewing role consolidations. She might be shifting some titles around. Nothing personal. Nothing personal. That phrase again. I felt it in my throat like a piece of dry bread that wouldn't go down. By late afternoon, I saw the daily task reports going directly to Jenna. I wasn't even in the CC line. Nurses were checking in with her, not me. The change wasn't announced. No meeting. No memo. But it had happened all the same. I sat in the staff lounge alone after the last round of meds. Everyone else had gone for break or for the day. I looked at the clock on the wall, 4:42 p.m., and let the silence spread out across the empty chairs and crumpled shift logs. This wasn't just a glitch. I'd been removed. Quietly. Deliberately. As if leadership could be erased like a title on a dry erase board. I wasn't angry, not in that moment. Mostly, I was embarrassed. Not for losing a role, but for being naive enough to believe I still had it. What hit me hardest wasn't the demotion. It was the idea of being perceived as difficult, resistant, a relic. That word again, not aligned. I'd heard it whispered lately, attached to me like static. And it scared me more than I wanted to admit. I'd spent a career trying to be fair, reasonable, collaborative. Now, that very posture made me look like someone afraid of change.
Was I?
I remembered something my mother told me when I was fresh out of nursing school after I'd stood up to a preceptor who'd skipped rounds. "Don't let anyone define you just because you stayed quiet," she said. "Silence only protects truth if it's chosen, not forced." That sentence came back now like a bell I hadn't realized was ringing all along. The next morning, I found Lyle at Linden Roast again. Same seat, same notebook, half a blueberry muffin. He looked up as I walked in. "You've got that face," he said, before I even sat down. What face? The one people make when they realize they've been cut out of a conversation that used to include them. I slid into the chair across from him. "They didn't fire me," I said. "They just deleted me." He gave a soft whistle. Classic. Don't make it official and there's nothing to defend. "I'm not sure if I'm being paranoid or practical," I said. "I'm still showing up. Still doing the work. But now, it's like I'm invisible." He nodded. "That's not your paranoia. That's their strategy." I looked at him and asked, "If I walk away now, am I a coward? A quitter?" He sipped his coffee slowly before answering. "Quitting's when you give up. Leaving's when you decide the ground under your feet isn't sacred anymore." I turned those words over in my mind like stones in my pocket. "I keep wondering," I said, "what it says about me if I stay." He leaned forward just a little. "The bigger question, Elaine, is what it'll do to you if you don't go." That night, I woke up around 3.
Couldn't sleep.
The room was quiet, the air felt heavy, and I stared at the ceiling like it held answers. Eventually, I reached for the notebook on my nightstand and scribbled one line across the page. What am I still holding on to? And is it even worth holding anymore? I sat there staring at that question, knowing full well that the hardest part wasn't writing it. It was knowing I already had the answer. There's a particular kind of numbness that doesn't come from pain, it comes from invisibility. From showing up day after day, and realizing your presence no longer moves the air. It's like walking into a room where your body still casts a shadow, but no one reacts to it. No one expects it to speak. That was me. I still showed up at 6:45 a.m., tied my shoes the same way I always had, checked supply carts, and updated med sheets before the new shift started. But more and more, it felt like I was walking through a version of my job someone else had taken over. Same walls, same uniforms, different heartbeat. At the nurse's station, I noticed conversations would dip as I walked by. Not out of disrespect, no one rolled their eyes or snickered. It was worse than that. It was polite silence. The kind people offer when they don't know whether to include you anymore. Jenna, fresh-faced and sure of herself, had started running the morning briefings. It just happened. One day I was leading them, and the next she was standing in my spot with a clipboard and a scripted list. No one said, "Elaine, step back." No one had to. The shift had already happened in their minds. I was an old book someone forgot to return but didn't have the heart to throw away. Even the bulletin board had lost its voice. For years, I'd posted weekly care updates, tips, resident birthdays. Now it stood blank for 4 days in a row. When I asked if anyone had seen the next schedule or new policy memos, they smiled a little too kindly and told me to check my email. One afternoon, after finishing a double check on med dispersals, I sat alone in the break room. It was near silent. The coffee pot was still full. No one had touched it since morning rounds. I glanced at the clock, then at the door, half expecting someone to wander in. But no one did. That's when my phone buzzed. A soft vibration on the table. I picked it up. 3 short messages, stacked together from Mira. "Elaine, I'm sorry to send this. I found something in the shared files by accident. You should see it." I screenshotted it before they took it down. My stomach tightened before I even opened the attachment. The image loaded slowly. A screenshot of an email thread from the internal leadership list. Subject line: Q3 Leadership Optimization, Position Phaseouts. 3 names listed in a neat, professional chart.
My name was at the top.
Elaine Whittaker, RN Lead. Status: Phaseout Target, Q2 Exit, HR Compliant. Rationale: Redundancy, cost-to-impact mismatch. I stared at it. My eyes ran over the words again and again, but nothing changed. Cost-to-impact mismatch. What a tidy way to describe a person. Not a nurse. Not a leader. Just a line item too expensive to justify. I didn't cry. Not right away. I just sat there, holding my phone like it was buzzing with static, even though it was perfectly still. All at once, the weeks of vague meetings, the missed memos, the sudden handoffs, they all locked into place like puzzle pieces. This hadn't just started. It had been orchestrated. Quietly. Strategically. I wasn't being overlooked. I was being removed, gently, surgically, before anyone would think to raise a question. They weren't just replacing me. They were pretending I'd already left. I felt something collapse inside me. Not a dramatic explosion. Just the slow, heavy falling of a wall I'd leaned on for too long.
My throat went dry.
My hands were cold. I had trained 3 of the people on that leadership list, stayed late for sick families, wrote policy that was still printed in the manual. And now I was nothing more than a cost. I wanted to scream, to storm into Renata's office and demand she say it to my face. But I didn't. I just sat there and let the truth take up space. Let it breathe its full shape into the room. Then I whispered one word. I didn't even realize I said it aloud until the echo settled in my chest.
No.
It wasn't defiant. It was final. I wasn't going to sit through one more meeting, smiling for the sake of optics. I wasn't going to let them wrap this in a thank you speech or a sanitized exit email. I wasn't going to let silence write my ending. And I wasn't going to pretend this was okay. A verse came to me. Not shouted, not rehearsed. Just there, like a steady hand on the small of my back. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Matthew 5 verse 37. I'd carried that line with me for years. I'd spoken it to patients when hard choices came. I'd whispered it to new nurses afraid to speak up. Now it was for me.
Peace isn't passivity.
And silence, when it's coerced, is just another form of fear. I stood up slowly. My knees ached. My back tightened from sitting too long. But I felt clear, like someone had wiped the fog off the glass. I opened the break room door and stepped out into the hallway I had walked 1,000 times before. But this time, I wasn't wondering what people thought. This time, I was carrying a truth that no one else could unsee. And I knew what I had to do next. I didn't even try to sleep that night. I lay there for hours, staring up at the ceiling fan as it turned in slow, uneven circles, making the same soft clicking sound it always had. But that night, even that sound felt louder, like it was counting something I couldn't name. The house was still, but not peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that comes when your thoughts take up too much space. When the weight of truth finally lands on your chest, and you can't roll it off. At some point, around midnight, I got up. My knees popped a little as I stood. I wrapped my old shawl around my shoulders, gray and frayed at the sleeves, and padded barefoot into the kitchen. The table was cold to the touch. I didn't bother turning on the overhead light, just the small lamp near the sink. Warm, golden light pooled onto the tabletop, and the rest of the kitchen stayed in shadow.
That felt about right.
I opened my laptop. The screen blinked awake, and the empty document opened. Blank, waiting, expectant. The cursor sat there like it was daring me. I typed the subject line first. Formal resignation plus accountability note. My hands hovered for a second, but the words came quickly. Not because I rehearsed them, but because they'd been sitting just under the surface for weeks. I can no longer do a job I'm not allowed to do properly. I stopped and read it again. That was it. That was the core. Not angry. Not pitiful. Just real. The kind of truth that makes your shoulders drop because you've finally said it out loud. Then I started documenting. 6 incidents. All within the last 90 days. Each one with details, dates, times, missed checks, software misfires, patient risk. I kept it clinical, factual. No adjectives. No accusations. I wasn't trying to shame anyone, but I wasn't going to lie for them either. This wasn't about one bad shift. It was a pattern, a slow bleed of safety and responsibility. And the worst part? No one seemed to care until someone like me pointed it out. And when I did, I was labeled resistant. I added a brief cover note to the top of the memo. This letter serves as formal notice of my resignation from Sunwell Haven. My reasons are outlined in full in the attached document. Please consider this my final contribution toward the safety and dignity of those we serve. I read it 3 times. Then I saved it. And in that moment, a kind of quiet came over me. Not the anxious kind. The kind that arrives when something long overdue has finally been faced. It wasn't rest, but it was peace. The kind you earn when you stop making excuses for things you know are wrong. The next morning, I printed 2 hard copies. One went into an envelope I addressed to Dr. Lyle Murrin. He still consulted 2 mornings a week at Greenwood Memorial, and I knew exactly where his drop box was. The other I folded neatly and put in my bag. I sent the digital version to HR, CC'd it to Maggie and Sal, 2 of the most grounded nurses I knew. People who still saw this work as a calling, not a ladder. Then I walked into the front office and asked to speak with Renata. 15 minutes, I said to her assistant. He didn't look at me when he nodded. She's expecting you. Of course she was. Renata didn't look up when I entered. She was typing, probably into the same screen where she'd scheduled my phase-out weeks ago. Elaine, she said, fingers still moving. You asked for this meeting? I did. What's this about? She asked, glancing at me for the briefest moment. I pulled the envelope from my bag and placed it on her desk. She looked at it like it might be ticking. I assume this is in response to your recent concerns, she said. It's my resignation, I replied, and documentation of what's gone wrong here, of what you've allowed to go wrong. She didn't open it, just kept staring at the envelope like it was beneath her. This is unexpected, she said, voice clipped. Frankly, a little dramatic. My hands stayed at my sides. What's dramatic is watching a resident fall down a stairwell while you defend a dashboard that's never worked. What's dramatic is slowly being erased while people talk about alignment. Renata's jaw twitched, just slightly. I'll forward this to HR, she said, reaching for the envelope. That's fine, I answered. But forwarding it won't erase what it says. I turned to leave, then paused. You don't have to accept my presence anymore, I said, my voice even. But you do have to accept the truth in that letter. That part's not optional. She didn't respond. And I didn't wait for her to. The hallway felt strangely familiar again as I walked down it. Like it remembered me, even if the people didn't. The floor creaked the same way by the linen closet. The air still smelled faintly of antiseptic and vanilla lotion. But I didn't belong to it anymore. Back at the nurse's station, I opened my drawer, gathered the small things that were still mine, my stethoscope, my favorite blue ink pens, the notepad with my initials at the corner. I pulled the picture of my daughter out from behind the magnet and folded it carefully. I zipped my bag slowly. No rush. No panic. Just purpose. As I stood to leave, I thought about something I heard in a sermon years ago, during a time I was sure I'd hit rock bottom. God doesn't call us to stay in every room we help build. That line came back now, soft but steady. I smiled. Then I walked out, not broken, not bitter. Just free. I packed slowly on my last day. There was no checklist, no HR escort, no clipboard with boxes to tick. Just me, standing in front of a metal locker that had held the little pieces of my routine for 15 years. I opened the drawer one last time, breathing in that faint metallic scent mixed with the ghost of old coffee and alcohol wipes. There wasn't much inside, just a bundle of blue and black pens I never let anyone borrow, 2 small spiral notebooks with frayed corners, and a pack of peppermint gum I'd forgotten about. And the photo. It had been taped inside my locker door for over a decade. My husband's arm around me, our daughter in the middle with her graduation cap tilted sideways, both of them laughing. The edges of the photo had curled slightly with time, the ink faded just enough to look like a memory. It felt strange to peel it off, like I was erasing something sacred. But I folded it gently, placed it inside the front pocket of my bag, and closed the door without looking back. I turned to my keycard at the admin desk. The young man behind the counter barely looked up. No handshake. No farewell lunch. No printed email saying, "Best wishes on your next chapter." That kind of thing didn't happen when you left on your own terms. Not here. Still, there was a sense of ceremony in the hallway. Not from balloons or parting gifts, but from the silence. It wasn't awkward or empty, it was reverent. As I walked that corridor one final time, I noticed the nurses. Most were young. Some leaned against the walls with folded arms. Others sat quietly at their stations, pretending to review charts that didn't need reviewing. They didn't say much, but they watched. One gave me a small nod as I passed. Another mouthed the words "thank you," her lips trembling slightly. Mira stood near the east wing door, eyes glassy but steady. As I approached, she stepped forward and slipped something folded into the side pocket of my tote. She didn't speak, just placed her hand briefly on my arm, then stepped back. It was more than I'd expected, more than I'd needed. But I carried their silence with me like a kind of blessing, unspoken proof that I hadn't wasted myself here. When I reached the front doors, I paused on the sidewalk. The building stood as it always had, gray brick and glass catching the soft light of early afternoon. From this spot, it looked the same as the day I first walked in, with a clipboard tucked under my arm and nerves crackling in my chest. But it wasn't the same, and neither was I. I had walked into Sunwell Haven full of ambition, full of belief that care was something sacred. I walked away not with bitterness, but with clarity. And that was harder to come by than I ever imagined. When I got home, the house was still and quiet. I dropped my bag onto the entry bench and toed off my shoes. The sun poured across the kitchen tile in long golden lines. It felt like the first breath after surfacing from deep water. A little while later, my phone buzzed. One message. "I'm proud of you, Whittaker."
Lyle.
5 words. That was all. But it hit deeper than a speech ever could. The days that followed were calm in a way that felt foreign at first. I took long walks with no destination. I cleaned out the garden shed I'd ignored for years. I baked bread that rose too high and laughed when it fell in the middle. I made soup from scratch and read books that had gathered dust on my shelf. The quiet unnerved me at first, but gradually it began to feel like healing, like space I hadn't realized I needed. Then came the call. It was late afternoon. I didn't recognize the number, but the voice on the other end reached through the line like a chill.
Elaine.
It's Renata. Her tone was stripped of its usual polish. She didn't sound composed. She sounded small. There's been an incident, she said quickly. Mr. Pierce. He passed away during the night shift. They missed his oxygen checks. No one noticed his O2 was dropping until morning. I didn't speak. She kept going. The family's demanding answers. There's talk of legal action. HR is scrambling. And the press has already started calling. I sat down slowly at the edge of my couch. Her words didn't surprise me, but they still weighed heavy. We need someone, she added. Someone who knows the system, who can help us document everything, walk us through what went wrong. Maybe just for a few days. Please. I looked out the window. The backyard trees were swaying gently. Sunlight filtered through the leaves and made dappled patterns on the lawn. A small bird landed on the fence, tilted its head, and flew away again. I took a breath. I'm sorry to hear about Mr. Pierce, I said softly. And I meant it. Renata exhaled. Too fast. Elaine, I know things didn't end smoothly.
But you know this place.
You could help stabilize things. Just until the storm passes. I let her words hang in the air a moment. Renata, I said calmly, you had all the information. You had the reports, the warnings. You had every opportunity to prevent this. She didn't argue. And I'm not angry, I continued. But I've moved on. I don't belong there anymore. Silence. I hope you find someone who does, I said gently. Someone who still believes they can fix what you've broken. All she could say was, okay. Then I said goodbye. I didn't hang up in triumph. There was no deep breath of victory, no internal applause. Just stillness. A few days after the call, I found myself back at Linden Roast. Same corner table. Same chipped green mug they always saved for regulars like me. The place smelled like nutmeg and roasted beans. Warm, familiar, and a little melancholy, like someone had just finished baking and stepped away before anyone could say thank you. I wasn't reading the paper because I wanted to. It was habit. A small, quiet ritual left over from years of scanning headlines between back-to-back shifts. Then I saw it. Buried in the local section, halfway down the page between an announcement about library funding and a notice for the city council's upcoming noise ordinance vote. The headline was small, but it took all the air out of the room when I read it. Family seeks inquiry after overnight death at Sunwell Haven. My hands stilled. The cinnamon scone sat untouched beside me. The article wasn't long. No quotes from angry relatives. No exposé. Just the facts, plain and stark. An elderly patient, Mr. Alvin Pierce, had died sometime during the early morning hours. According to his family, his vitals hadn't been checked for over 6 hours. The night shift was understaffed. The monitoring schedule had been changed the week before. The administration gave no official comment. I folded the paper slowly, pressing the crease with my fingertips. I didn't look around the cafe. I didn't need to. The room might as well have gone quiet around me. I didn't feel triumph. Not even vindication. Just sadness. A low, slow ache. Like I just found out an old friend had passed, and there was no funeral, just a note slipped under the door. It wasn't my grief, but it brushed close. It brushed the edge of everything I'd fought for and been dismissed over. Everything they told me was overreacting. Everything they asked me to be quiet about for the sake of morale. And now someone was dead. That night, I didn't talk about it. Didn't call anyone. I just sat on the porch as the sun went down, wrapped in the same gray shawl I'd worn the night I wrote my resignation. It was cold, but it didn't bother me. My silence that evening wasn't heavy. It was settled. By the end of the week, I started my new job at Greenwood Memorial Care. It was small. 18 beds. 2 wings. A rec room that doubled as a library and a space for morning yoga. No corporate logos on the walls. No laminated flowcharts shouting efficiency. Just doors with nameplates and tiny notes beside them. Likes chamomile at night.
Prefers socks with stripes.
Doesn't like loud voices after 5 p.m. I wasn't there to manage or supervise. I wasn't director of anything. They brought me in for 10 hours a week as a consultant, someone to help train new hires on person-centered care and engagement practices. It wasn't a title. It wasn't a ladder. But it was enough. The first time I saw one of the younger nurses take a seat beside a patient and just sit with them. No chart open, no timer running, my throat tightened. She just sat, nodding, hands in her lap, as a resident named Esther told her about her late husband's favorite fishing spot in Wisconsin. No one interrupted. No one hurried her along. This is what it was supposed to be, I thought. Not perfect, but real. Unhurried.
Human.
I didn't need a corner office to feel useful. I didn't need a badge with a title. I just needed to be somewhere values weren't something you had to fight for. 2 weeks in, I found an envelope tucked into my cubby. No stamp, just my name, written in neat cursive across the front. Inside was a small, folded piece of notebook paper. Elaine. I couldn't say it before. I was scared. But you were the reason I decided to go back to school and get my RN. I saw how you stood up when it cost you something. I want to be that kind of nurse.
Thank you, Mira.
I sat down in the staff lounge and read it twice. Then again. No one saw me wipe my eyes. And if they had, I think they would have understood. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into the back of my pocket Bible, right next to the page I'd underlined years ago. Let your yes be yes, and your no be no. I never quoted scripture aloud at work. But some things don't need to be spoken to matter. That evening, I stayed after shift change. The halls quieted, lights dimmed, voices softened. I stepped outside to the back patio and leaned against the railing. The sky was streaked with a soft orange glow, the kind that only lasts 10 minutes and always makes you wish you'd looked up sooner. A few residents were sitting beneath the oak trees, playing dominoes and laughing at something one of them had said. The wind rustled the branches above them, like a lullaby made of leaves. One of the men, a former professor who liked his tea with lemon and refused to wear slippers, looked up and waved. Miss Whittaker, he called out. I made your tea. You better come get it before it goes cold. I smiled, something warm rising in my chest. I lifted a hand and waved back. I'm coming, I said, voice light. Just give me a minute. I stayed there a little longer, breathing in the quiet, letting it wrap around me like that old shawl. No clipboard. No decisions waiting for me. No email demanding answers. Just stillness. And the sound of my own heart, calm, steady, and finally at home in its own rhythm. Before we close this story, I just want to say this. I didn't share it to prove a point or to call anyone out. I shared it because I know how quiet some heartbreaks can be, how sometimes walking away from what once meant everything is the bravest thing you'll ever do. Maybe you've been there too, sitting in a quiet room, holding a truth no one wants to hear. If so, I hope you know this. Protecting your peace is never weakness. And no title, no paycheck, no praise is worth trading your self-respect for. Have you ever had to let go of something that once defined you? If this story touched a part of your heart, I hope you'll stay close for the next one. Not every chapter in life is loud, but the quiet ones often carry the most truth.